A second excerpt from my original short story, These Things Happen. If you have not heard excerpt 1, feel free to do so. This is a continuation, and I will be starting a few events back. Mitchell then slowly rose upright again, his knees appearing weaker than before, and with his eyes fixed on something else now. Ben rubbed his warm scalp, feeling the sweat hardening under his hair. You think there's more to him? He said. Under all the dirt? You think there's more? Mitchell exhaled and rolled his tongue around the inside of his bottom lip. He then took a small step forward, as well as carefully as to not disturb the day's unexpected little discovery, only to bend back down again. He planted one hand upon the ground, and with the other he removed his now greasy straw hair from his eyes and back behind one ear, saying aloud, and yet partially to himself, "Are those fingers?" Ben, without much hesitation at all, stepped forward. He saw before Mitchell 2, maybe just barely 3, edges of what very much looked like bone coming up from the dirt. Ben's nerves may have been stirred up something awful before, but they were running a marathon now. Ben even took to laying his hand across his stomach and gritting his teeth while saying, "I reckon we ought to find out who it is." "Why would someone put him here?" Mitchell rose back up and looked his dad square in the eye. "And what good is putting him this shallow?" Mitchell softly asked. Ben returned his focus to those bony shapes in the dirt. "Could be it was here a long time ago. It rained good before we come up. Could have surfaced in all that storm." "Should I send for the police?" Mitchell questioned. Ben tore his attention from the ground and turned towards the house. Funny, the house looked so quaint and so calm, all the while he was in a panic not 100 yards from its porch. If you wanted to, you could almost say the house had a naive presence to it, as if that one story of roof and walls was innocent and unaware of the mess out in the field. That funny feeling was the closest Ben was going to get to relief. That and the fact that he could now see his daughter staring at the both of them from the kitchen window. He could just make out her blonde hair wrapped in a pleasant blue little scarf, like she often did on days when the farmhouse had things needin' tended to. Ben rubbed a good amount of sweat from his face with his dusty sleeve. "I reckon we ought to find ourselves out a little more. Find out what we are dealing with here." "You think so?" Mitchell replied. "I think we should see exactly what we have here is all," Ben answered. Then, to an unexpected Mitchell, Ben faintly broke a smile upon continuing with, "Could be he held himself up a stagecoach. Could be he has a satchel with $1 million under his arm." The humor was not lost on Mitchell, but that did not prevent him from staring blankly back at his dad without so much as a grin. Mitchell couldn't quite make out where that joke had come from, but he deduced it as a good sign in his dad, causing a subtle, nearly imperceptible nod to be given, followed by a small "yeah" to be released. Ben put his fists to his hips and gave yet another exhale, and what little smile he held melted away. "We'll call the police after. Let's get him out of there, so we know exactly what we are dealing with here first, and then give them a call after." "You sure?" Mitchell said with a very direct tone. With the back of his hand, Ben rubbed his forehead, squinting up at the sun. He sighed, tried to moisten his mouth, and then returned his attention back to Mitchell. "I guess I ain't positive it's the best idea, but him being on my land, I'd want to see for myself what else is here. I'm curious. Ain't no telling who he is, or what he has got with him maybe. If I don't like what I see, or things turn worse, I'll go in the house and call sheriff myself." Mitchell swayed his head towards the house as a warm gust of wind lifted his hair off his shoulders. It actually felt a little pleasant, even if the air was layered with a cold, almost sick feeling from this odd morning's turn of events. It made the air heavy, and the blue sky seem bleak. But wasn't it funny how that warm wind still had a way of reaching inside a body and making them feel the slightest bit of ease? Ben interrupted the moment with, "Why don't you go on and bring the truck to the edge of the field there?" Ben said, pointing. "In the back I have 2 shovels and I think 2 picks. That should do it." Mitchell didn't turn. He just squinted into the breeze towards the house. His stomach had grown nauseous. Fixated on the breeze, he replied off to the side, "Okay." Ben wasn't any better. He was trying to shake the scare off and it showed. "Go on now. The keys are on the table by the TV. I'm gonna turn off this tractor before it plumb overheats itself." Mitchell began to walk forward while Ben climbed up onto the tractor. But before settling into the cabin, he turned and yelled towards Mitchell, "Mitch! When you go in the house, don't tell your sister about this. Not yet. No sense in startling her, okay?" Mitchell nodded and kind of waved over his shoulder as he kept on walking. Ben sat in that tractor cabin and turned off the ignition. When Mitchell entered the house, it felt strange. The cooler air and the stillness of the room made everything just outside the door feel almost like a foreign shore. The screen door creaked obnoxiously and slammed shut behind him. He let the cool air nip at his sweaty neck for a moment. To his right was the living room, carpeted with a small blue couch that just maybe had never looked more inviting. Mitchell's knees were still on the weak side. In fact, the walk to the house was quite unkind to them. Mitchell shifted his head left towards the open kitchen, where there stood his sister, with her arms folded and her face bearing unmistakable curiosity. "Well?" Lana said, her eyebrows raised as she kind of jolted her head slightly forward as if trying to express that she too had a right to know what was going on out there. Mitchell stared at her for a moment, while listening to a ceiling fan swaying at medium speed in the next room over. He scraped some dry flesh from his lower lip with his teeth, and then with an ill-prepared but stern voice said, "Dad is making me help him dig up a body we found." A moment passed, then another, and then another, until Lana unfolded her arms and said, "Yeah, okay, Mitch, sure." And she then turned and left the kitchen for any one of the rooms down the hallway that was accessible from the opposite side of the room. Her tone seemed to say she didn't take the news serious and was responding with sarcasm, but then her face and abrupt leaving almost tried to say she took Mitchell very serious. Mitchell snuffed that cold air into his nostrils and then turned and made his way into the adjoining living room, where he snatched up the keys and used the rest of his strength to get back outside. While making his way to the truck parked around the corner of the house, there was this overwhelming sense of, "Is this happening?" hovering around him. He was well aware that it was, but had only just now touched down just how surreal this morning really was. You just can't prepare for moments like these, nor do you ever actually expect to experience them. It was almost funny how surreal such obvious reality could be. As he walked, he listened to that breeze exhaust itself, and then swell again and touch the house's porch, the trees, the cornfield, and Mitchell himself, before dying down again. Not unlike an ocean's ebb. There were also locusts and large birds composing, and farm equipment speaking with its rustic voice in gentle metallic pops and creaks as it settled in the sun. An eternally memorable morning, and nothing in the world was different. Thank you very kindly for listening to the second excerpt of These Things Happen. I hope you enjoyed it, and opinions welcome.